She had never been to a place like this before. The grand doors opened into a room that seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with golden chandeliers, polished floors, and walls covered in fine paintings. The air smelled faintly of perfume and polished wood, a mix that made her heart beat faster. She paused for a moment just outside the main hall, taking a deep breath. She could hear the soft murmur of voices inside, laughter mingling with polite greetings, and the delicate clink of glasses. For a brief second, she felt small, really small. She was just a girl with a piano and years of practice behind her. She was not part of this world of wealth and influence where people moved with confident ease. Her hands were slightly trembling, but she did not let it show. She straightened. Her back smoothed her simple dress and stepped forward. Every step she took echoed lightly on the marble floor. People turned to look, some with curiosity, some with polite nods, and some with subtle smirks. She sensed immediately that she was being watched differently, measured differently. It was not an open welcome. It was an examination. She could feel it in the way the powerful man who had invited her glanced at her when she entered. He stood at the far end of the room, tall and commanding. His gaze swept over her with what seemed like both amusement and disbelief. He smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was a smile that carried judgment, the kind that tested boundaries without saying anything. His hand gestured lightly, a polite invitation for her to come closer. She nodded and moved forward, trying to keep her step steady. Inside, she could hear the soft murmur of conversations about businesses, investments, and projects she barely understood. Words like influence and networking filled the air, reminding her that she was in a place where status mattered far more than talent or effort. Her heart pounded as she approached the piano, a grand instrument that gleamed under the soft lights. It was magnificent, perfect, and intimidating. She had played many pianos in her life, but this one felt different. It was as if it had been waiting for someone of another world, someone of wealth and power, someone who belonged. And here she was, a simple girl with nothing but her hands and the music she carried inside her. She paused beside the piano, running her fingers lightly over the smooth wood, feeling the coldness of it, the weight of expectation pressing down on her. She could hear the powerful man speaking to a group nearby. His words were soft, but she caught enough to understand the tone. He was questioning her ability without saying it directly, his voice carrying amusement and disbelief. He made a comment about her background, something polite yet condescending, hinting that a girl like her might struggle with an audience like this. Some of the guests laughed lightly, as if joining in the joke. She felt a sting, but she swallowed it. She had learned long ago that anger or words could be dangerous in moments like this. What she needed was silence, focus, and music. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. Memories flooded her mind. She remembered hours spent practicing in a small room, a room with cracked walls and a window that let in the cold wind during winters. She remembered evenings when her fingers bled from the piano keys and no one noticed, no one cared. She remembered the teachers who doubted her, telling her that her dreams were too big, that her hands were too small, that her spirit was too fragile. And she remembered her mother's quiet voice, saying, "Your music is your own. Let it speak." Opening her eyes, she looked around once more. The guests were still watching. Some looked genuinely curious, some still doubtful. The powerful man's smile had not faded. If anything, it had grown sharper, a little sharper than polite. She felt a knot in her stomach, but forced herself to relax her shoulders. She walked slowly toward the piano, placing her hands on the keys. The surface was smooth, cool under her fingers. For a moment, she let her hands hover above the keys. Feeling the energy of the instrument, the weight of the room, and the eyes of every person in that hall. The man approached, his steps deliberate, almost theatrical. He stopped just a few feet away, looking down at her hands, his expression a mixture of amusement and challenge. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his voice calm. But there was a subtle edge, a challenge hidden in the softness. She did not answer. Words were useless. She had learned that music was stronger than words, that it could cut through pride, arrogance, and doubt without saying anything at all. She sat down at the piano, the bench cold under her hands. The room was silent now, as if everyone knew that something was about to begin. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling the small tremor that always came before she started. She let her mind go quiet, emptying herself of fear and doubt. She thought of her past, not as a burden, but as a source of strength. Every struggle, every tear, every moment of quiet determination was a note she could play, a melody she could weave. The powerful man moved slightly closer, still watching, still testing. She could feel the tension in the room, the subtle challenge in the air. He did not clap, he did not encourage, he only waited. He wanted to see her fail. She knew this. But she also knew that she could not fail, not because she was trying to prove him wrong, but because she had already lived her music. Her fingers touched the first keys lightly, almost hesitantly, but as soon as the first note rang out, she felt a shift. Even before the full melody began, she noticed a few heads turning, eyes widening slightly. The room, which had seemed so distant and cold, started to change with the sound. The notes were soft at first, tentative, delicate, but they carried something real, something human. She let the music flow from her fingers, each note a reflection of her journey. It was not just music, it was a story, a life told through sound, through rhythm, through the quiet power of persistence. Some guests whispered to each other, curiosity replacing judgment. Others leaned forward slightly, unable to look away. The powerful man's smile faltered just a little. He had expected something ordinary, something that would entertain the room for a moment, maybe even amuse them. He had not expected this. He had not expected the music to carry her story, her strength, her courage. Through the keys, her hands moved with confidence now, every note precise yet filled with emotion. She remembered the teachers who doubted her, the people who laughed. At her dreams, the nights when she sat alone in a dimly lit room just to practice one more passage. All of that pain, all of that effort, flowed through her fingers. She did not look at the audience, did not need to. She only felt the piano, the music, and the quiet truth that she had carried for so long. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The room seemed to breathe with her, the chandeliers reflecting light and patterns she had never noticed before. The powerful man remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. But she felt it, a change in the air, a shift in energy. The doubts that had hovered over her since the moment she stepped inside were slowly dissolving, replaced by attention, by respect, by an understanding that went beyond words. For her, this was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about being heard, being seen, and letting her truth shine without apology. She could feel every eye in the room on her, but she did not falter. She did not play for recognition or applause. She played because she had carried this music in her for so long, and it was finally the right moment for it to be heard, as she finished the first piece. There was a silence so deep it seemed to linger in the air, heavy and full of meaning. The audience did not move, did not speak. They were holding their breath, processing what they had just witnessed. Even the powerful man stood still, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betraying a flicker of surprise. He had underestimated her, as he had underestimated the power of a simple girl with a piano and a story to tell. She rose slightly from the bench, not looking for approval, not waiting for a reaction. The music had spoken, and it had said everything she needed it to say. She could feel her own heartbeat slowing, her mind quieting after the storm of emotion she had poured into the piano. The room had shifted, subtly but undeniably. She had arrived as someone small in the eyes of others, and yet she was leaving a presence they could not ignore. It was just the beginning. She knew there would be more challenges, more eyes to judge, more moments where she would have to prove herself. But in that moment, standing beside the piano in a grand hall that had felt so intimidating just minutes ago, she realized something important. No one could take her story from her. No one could silence the music that lived in her hands and heart. She had stepped into a room meant to judge her and had begun to transform it with her courage, her skill, and her truth. She had barely finished adjusting her seat when she felt the room's energy shift again, the powerful man who had invited her moved closer, his footsteps deliberate, like someone who was not used to being challenged. She could see it in his eyes, the hint of doubt that had not been there before. He had expected her to be small, fragile, easily dismissed. But after the first few notes of her music, something had changed.
Ow.
She could feel it in the way the guests were now turning their attention fully toward her. There were whispers, yes, but not the mocking kind. There was curiosity, a genuine desire to understand what was happening before them. The powerful man finally clapped, though his expression remained guarded. It was clear he was aware of the shift, aware that his attempt to humiliate had failed, aware that the room now saw her in a new light. He could not reverse what had happened. She had proven, quietly but undeniably, that presence, talent, and courage were far stronger than influence or intimidation. She stepped away from the piano, feeling a deep sense of calm and fulfillment. The energy of the room had shifted completely, and she knew it. She had taken a space meant to judge, and had turned it into a space that celebrated skill and authenticity. She had not needed to argue or confront, only to be herself, to let her music speak, and to let the truth of her dedication shine. She realized something vital in that moment. Power is not always about wealth, influence, or dominance. True power often lies in skill, courage, and authenticity. She had experienced this firsthand, and the room had witnessed it as well. She had turned an attempted humiliation into an undeniable demonstration of strength. And she had done so with grace, patience, and unwavering focus. As she stood and stepped away from the piano, she felt a sense of calm and clarity. The room that had once been intimidating, full of judgment and whispers, was now a place that had witnessed her strength, her story, her courage. She had begun to change perceptions, one note at a time, and she knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more moments of scrutiny, more tests of her resilience. But she had learned something vital tonight: the power of authenticity, the influence of dedication, and the undeniable strength of music. The room felt different now. It was no longer just a gathering of powerful people, polite smiles, and quiet whispers. It had changed, shifted subtly, but unmistakably. The music had left its mark, and she could feel it in the way people were looking at her. They were no longer just spectators. They were witnesses to something rare, something real. The air carried a quiet energy, a shared acknowledgement that what had just happened was extraordinary. The powerful man, who had tried to diminish her before she even played, was standing at the edge of the room, trying to maintain a composed demeanor. Yet the tension in his posture, the slight tightness around his eyes, betrayed him. He had underestimated the situation, underestimated her, and underestimated the strength of what she could convey through her music. His influence, which had once dominated the room, seemed to fade with every note she played. She moved back to the piano for the next piece, her fingers brushing the keys lightly at first, testing, feeling, and listening. This piece was different from the last. It was bold, commanding, and full of intricate emotion. She had chosen it carefully, knowing it would require every bit of her focus. And it was meant to demonstrate not just technical skill, but emotional depth. She took a deep breath and let her hands move naturally. Guided by years of practice and the quiet certainty of her abilities, the audience leaned in immediately. There was no hesitation now, no doubt lingering in the corners of their minds. They were entirely absorbed, sensing that something significant was unfolding. The powerful man, standing tall, but increasingly aware of his inability to control the situation, shifted slightly from foot to foot. He had wanted to dictate the mood of the room, to set the expectations, to show dominance. But she had already taken control in a way that no one could contest. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision,
Yes.
each note striking with clarity and purpose. She let herself become fully immersed, closing her eyes to feel the resonance of the instrument and the energy of the room. The music was no longer just her on it, was speaking for her struggles, her persistence, her courage. Every chord carried a story, every pause held meaning. She could feel the connection between herself and the audience, a silent, invisible thread that tied them together through emotion. The powerful man's expression hardened slightly, as if he were grappling with a realization he did not want to acknowledge. He had expected a polite, brief performance, perhaps even a stumble that would confirm his doubts. Instead, he was confronted with undeniable talent and presence, a quiet strength that could not be shaken by power or status. The room belonged to her now, not by force, but by the authenticity and beauty of her performance. She noticed subtle reactions in the audience. A few people had their hands lightly clasped, as if holding themselves together in awe. Others leaned forward, eyes fixed, silently absorbing every nuance. There were no whispers, no distractions, only attentiveness. It was as if the music had paused the world outside, created a space where only truth, skill, and human emotion mattered. She had transformed the energy of the room without a single word, without confrontation, simply by being present and allowing the music to speak. Her heart beat steadily, though with a quiet intensity. She could feel the power of the moment pressing gently, encouraging her to give everything she had. She let the melody rise, intertwining softness with strength, moments of vulnerability with crescendos of boldness. The audience reacted almost instinctively, moved by the ebb and flow of the piece. She could sense the subtle realization dawning on some of them that talent and courage could not be measured by wealth, status, or influence. The powerful man shifted again, and she caught a glimpse of the slight clenching of his fists, the subtle tension in his jaw. He had tried to shape the room to his will, to dominate and humiliate, but she had reversed the roles quietly yet completely. Without speaking, without challenging him directly, she had taken the space, commanded attention, and made everyone listen. He could feel the power he sought slipping away, replaced by a force he had not anticipated: authenticity, dedication. She allowed herself a small smile as she continued to play. Not for him, not for the applause, but for the certainty that she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. Music was her language, her voice, and her way of asserting herself in a world that often judged too quickly and too harshly. She let the notes flow freely, each one a declaration of persistence and belief in herself. The room responded. She felt the subtle hum of admiration and attention that had replaced the earlier tension. Some guests were visibly moved. A few dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Others exchanged silent looks of amazement. They had entered the room expecting elegance, politeness, perhaps even entertainment, but they were witnessing something deeper: the raw honesty and skill of someone who had faced struggle and doubt, yet refused to be diminished. The music had transformed the environment, turning it from a place of judgment into a space of shared human experience. She was aware of the subtle shift happening in the powerful man. His posture had changed from commanding to cautious, from confident to aware. He had tried to intimidate her, to diminish her presence, but it was clear that the attempt had failed. She had done nothing overtly confrontational, yet she had claimed authority through something far stronger than force, through talent, through presence, and through courage. She had become the center of influence. Quietly yet undeniably, the piece reached its most complex passages, requiring her full concentration. Her fingers moved swiftly, yet gracefully, each note perfectly timed, each chord carefully balanced. She could feel the room vibrating with her energy, the audience responding to the subtle shifts in rhythm and tone. The music was no longer just a performance, it was a dialogue, a conversation that spoke to everyone present without uttering a single word. Even the powerful man could not look away. He had sought control, but she had demonstrated that influence could be wielded differently, that true power sometimes lay in patience, skill, and quiet confidence. He watched as she navigated every twist and turn of the piece, unable to interrupt, unable to assert himself. She was teaching, showing, and proving something that no words could convey. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The music carried her story, the hours of practice, the loneliness, the moments of doubt, and the triumphs she had quietly celebrated. The audience absorbed it all, drawn into her world by the honesty and passion she brought to each note. She had become both narrator and witness, allowing the room to experience the full depth of her journey. She noticed small reactions among the guests, the subtle nods, The gentle gasps of surprise at particularly intricate passages, the leaning forward in quiet attention. They were no longer thinking about status or judgment. They were thinking only about the music, and through it, about her. She had transformed their perceptions without saying a single word, and the powerful man could only watch. Aware that the situation had escaped his control, her hands moved with a fluidity born of years of dedication. She felt each note resonate, each chord echo through the room, carrying not just sound, but emotion, story, and presence. The powerful man's initial plan to belittle her, to humiliate her, had utterly failed. She had not responded with anger or confrontation. She had responded with excellence, with authenticity, and with the undeniable truth of her talent. As the piece approached its conclusion, she allowed the music to soften gradually, bringing the room gently back from the heights of intensity to a delicate, reflective place. The audience remained silent, absorbing the final notes, feeling the weight and beauty of what had been shared. Even the powerful man seemed subdued, the realization of her skill and composure settling into his awareness. When the final note faded, the silence lingered for a moment longer than expected. It was not awkward. It was filled with understanding, respect, and the quiet acknowledgement that something remarkable had just occurred. The room seemed to hold its breath, collectively processing the experience. And then the applause began, soft at first, then growing stronger, until it filled every corner of the hall. She stood slowly, bowing lightly, acknowledging the response without pride or arrogance. She had faced judgment, subtle humiliation, and skepticism, yet she had emerged with dignity and tact. The room once dominated by hierarchy and expectation. It's been transformed into a space of respect and recognition for talent, courage, and authenticity. She had claimed her place, not by force, but by being fully herself. She began to play again, choosing a piece that was slower, more deliberate, carrying a depth of emotion that words could never reach. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but they quickly grew in strength and clarity. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the vibration of each key, allowing the story within her to emerge naturally. The room fell into silence once more, and she could feel the tension in the air, not a tense pressure, but a delicate attentiveness, as if everyone were leaning in to hear not just the music, but the person behind it. The powerful man who had tried to undermine her earlier stood near the edge of the room. He had clearly not expected the response from the first piece, and now, with the second, he was visibly unsettled. His expression was guarded, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. He could not ignore what was happening, though he tried to maintain an appearance of control. The audience, too, was completely absorbed, their earlier skepticism fading with every note. It was as if the music had a magnetic pull, drawing them in and leaving little room for judgment or distraction. She let the melody unfold naturally, her fingers moving with grace and precision. Every note carried a piece of her history of the struggles. The lonely nights spent practicing until her fingers ached. The moments of doubt she had fought through, and the small triumphs that had kept her going. She had lived every part of this music, and now she was giving it to the room, allowing each person to feel the truth of her journey. Some guests shifted in their seats, captivated. They were no longer thinking about status or hierarchy. They were thinking only about the music and the emotion it evoked. A few leaned forward, their expressions softening, their eyes glistening slightly as they absorbed the story being told without words. Even the powerful man's closest aides were silent now, unable to mask the effect the music was having. She could feel the subtle shift in energy, the room slowly transforming from a place of judgment to a space where authenticity and talent demanded attention. Her mind was fully immersed in the music. She did not notice the subtle glances, the small nods, or the quiet exchanges of admiration among the guests. She only felt the keys beneath her fingers, the resonance of each chord, and the way the notes seemed to carry a message that was impossible to ignore. It was a language everyone could understand, though not everyone had expected it. She had become both storyteller and messenger, and the audience had no choice but to listen. The piece she was playing was intentionally challenging, requiring not just technical skill, but emotional depth. She knew it would test her concentration and perhaps the patience of the audience. But she welcomed the challenge. She thrived in these moments where vulnerability met strength, where the courage to perform fully could transform the space around her. Each measure was a step forward, a declaration that she belonged here not because of privilege or background, but because of talent, preparation, and unwavering dedication. She noticed the subtle reactions of people as she played. A few older guests had tears in their eyes. Some younger ones sat straighter, visibly moved by the intensity of her performance. She could feel the air in the room vibrating with attention, with a quiet reverence that had replaced doubt. Even those who had whispered earlier, expecting to be entertained by a polite performance, were now silent, fully present, as if the music had stripped away the pretenses that often filled such spaces. The powerful man was watching closely, his usual ease replaced by a tense alertness. He had wanted to control the room, to assert his dominance, and perhaps to humiliate her in front of everyone. But he could not do so now. The music had taken over, claiming the space in a way he could not influence. He shifted slightly, as if uncomfortable, his eyes flicking from her hands to the faces of the audience. It was clear that he was beginning to realize that power could not always be enforced. That influence could be challenged by something as simple and pure as talent and dedication. She let the music rise and fall, moving with intention through quiet, reflective passages and crescendos that filled the room with energy. The contrasts in the piece mirrored her journey: moments of doubt, moments of courage, moments of quiet reflection, and moments of triumph. She had lived through every emotion the music demanded, and now the room was living it with her. She could feel the collective pulse of the audience, each person responding in their own way, yet connected by the same experience. A subtle change occurred in the audience as she continued to play. People who had seemed indifferent or skeptical at the beginning were now leaning in, listening more closely, reacting more openly. The powerful man, despite himself, had begun to acknowledge the impact she was having. His posture had shifted slightly. The confidence he had wielded like armor earlier was no longer as solid. He was forced to recognize, however reluctantly, that her presence and her music had altered the energy of the room. She did not falter under the weight of expectation. If anything, it fueled her. She had spent years preparing for moments like this, not knowing they would be exactly like this, trusting that her music could speak beyond circumstances, beyond doubt, beyond judgment. She let the melody carry her story, the rhythm conveying her resilience, the harmonies echoing the trials she had endured. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful, each chord a reflection of the determination that had brought her here. Some guests were now visibly moved. A few had their hands pressed to their chests as if to hold the emotions stirred by the music. Others exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the unexpected depth of the performance. The room, once filled with polite conversation and whispers of judgment, was now united in a rare, shared experience, a moment of true human connection sparked by her talent and courage. She glanced briefly at the powerful man, though she did not need to. His expression had softened, the subtle arrogance replaced by something like respect, or at least awareness. He had underestimated her, underestimated the power of dedication and passion, and underestimated the ability of music to transcend social barriers. He had sought to humiliate, but she had responded not with confrontation, but with authenticity. The transformation was quiet, profound, and undeniable. Minutes turned into a longer stretch as she continued to play, but she did not lose focus. She was fully present, fully immersed, feeling each note resonate not just in her hands, but in the hearts of those listening. The room had become an extension of the music, every listener a participant in the story she was telling. She realized, in a quiet moment of clarity, that this was exactly why she had devoted her life to the piano, not for praise, not for recognition, but to create moments that could touch people, moments that could alter perspective, moments that could connect hearts across worlds. The piece reached a climactic section, demanding every ounce of her concentration. Her fingers moved with precision, yet flowed with emotion, balancing technical skill with expressive storytelling. She could feel the audience leaning in, following her every movement, every subtle nuance. The powerful man, standing rigidly at the edge of the room, could no longer mask his reaction. She had turned what he intended as a stage for her, its embarrassment into a demonstration of her undeniable skill and poise. As she neared the conclusion, she allowed the music to soften gradually, bringing the piece to a delicate, poignant close. The silence that followed was almost tangible, heavy with the weight of what had just been experienced. The audience was still absorbing the final notes, letting the emotions settle in their minds and hearts. Even the powerful man seemed momentarily speechless, confronted with the undeniable truth of her talent. Finally, applause began to rise, hesitant at first, then growing steadily until it filled the entire room. Some guests were standing, some clapping softly, some with eyes glistening. She bowed slightly, acknowledging the audience without arrogance or expectation. The music had spoken, had told her story, had conveyed her journey, and now the room had responded in a way that no words could capture. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not from the applause itself, but from the knowledge that she had remained true to herself and her art. She had faced judgment, scrutiny, and subtle humiliation, and had responded not with anger or defensiveness, but with courage, dedication, and talent. She had let the music do the speaking, and it had spoken volumes. The powerful man finally moved, clapping along with the others, though his expression remained controlled. She did not seek his approval. It was unnecessary. What mattered was that she had transformed the room, had captured attention, had shown that skill and heart could not be diminished by status or power. She had proved quietly but undeniably that her music carried a truth that demanded recognition. He cleared his throat, loudly enough for her to hear. "You play well for someone so." "Unexpected," he said, his voice smooth, polite, but edged with a challenge. It was a subtle jab, meant to remind everyone in the room of the difference in their worlds. She did not respond. Words had no power here. Music was her only weapon, her shield, and her voice. She let her fingers hover over the keys again, feeling the cool surface beneath her hands, letting her mind grow still and focus on the next piece she was about to play. The room waited. She could sense it. Every eye in the room, from the most important guest to the quiet person in the corner, was now watching her. She could feel the anticipation like a heavy weight pressing down on her shoulders. The powerful man leaned slightly toward one of his companions and spoke in a low voice, probably expecting them to hear the subtle insult she would surely falter under. "Let's see if she can hold their attention for more than a few minutes," he said. His words were sharp in their politeness, designed to humiliate without ever saying so directly. She did not flinch. She began to play again, this time choosing a piece that was more intricate, more daring. It was a piece she had practiced countless times in the quiet of her room, a piece that carried not just skill, but emotion. Her fingers danced over the keys, each note precise, yet flowing naturally, telling a story that no words could capture. The music started softly, almost shyly, but grew in confidence and strength with every measure. She could feel the air changing, as the audience leaning forward as if trying to catch every sound before it disappeared. Some guests exchanged glances. They had clearly expected an easy performance, something polite and decorative, not a music that demanded attention and stirred emotion. She could see their surprise, their fascination growing with every note. She was no longer just a performer. She had become the focus, the center of the room. And the energy that had once belonged solely to the powerful man was slowly shifting. She could feel it. He watched her closely, his eyes narrowing slightly, the smile on his face tightening into something more controlled. He had tried to humiliate her, to make her feel small, to turn the room into a place where her presence was a mistake. But the music would not allow that. It moved freely, filling every corner of the room, reaching people in a way that no words could. Even those who were skeptical could not deny the talent, the emotion, the power in her performance. She remembered the nights she had spent practicing alone, the hours when no one was there to encourage her, the time her fingers had hurt, and she had continued anyway because the music in her soul demanded it. All of those memories came alive in the music she now played. The audience could feel it, whether they understood why or not. The powerful man shifted slightly, as if uncomfortable, aware that the room was no longer his stage. The attention had moved, and he could not control it. Her mind focused entirely on the music. Each note was intentional, each pause deliberate. She did not play to impress. She played to express, to communicate something that only she could communicate. The room was no longer a place of judgment. It was becoming a place of revelation. People who had expected mockery or failure were now confronted with something real, something undeniable. She could see it in their faces, the surprise, the admiration, the quiet respect growing with each measure. She noticed that a few of the powerful man's closest allies leaned forward slightly, their faces now showing genuine curiosity rather than polite amusement. The man himself remained standing, but the confidence in his posture had wavered, even if only slightly. The laughter he had tried to inspire earlier had vanished, replaced by an almost tense attention. She did not look at him, nor did she need to. She only focused on the piano, on the sound, on the story she was telling through every key. The piece she was playing was long, intricate, and emotionally demanding. It required not only skill, but total immersion, and she had both. As she played, she could feel the reactions in the room shifting. People who had been skeptical moments ago were now leaning forward, following every note. Eyes widened slightly as the music seemed to reach into them, stirring emotions they had not expected to feel. She could see some of the older guests blinking back tears, some of the younger ones sitting straighter. Surprised at the depth of emotion carried in the melody, even the powerful man could not hide his reaction entirely. She could see the faint tightening of his jaw, the subtle shifting of his weight. He had tried to make this moment about power, about superiority, about humiliation. But the music had turned it into something else entirely. It was no longer a performance meant to be judged. It had become a mirror, reflecting talent, dedication, and the undeniable truth that skill and heart could not be silenced by wealth or authority. She did not stop playing. She let the music flow naturally, her fingers moving with confidence and grace. She had chosen this piece for a reason. It was complex, demanding, and full of emotion. Each note carried a fragment of her story, the struggles she had endured, the loneliness of practice, the moments of doubt, and the moments of quiet triumph. She had lived this music, and now it was living in the room with her. Affecting everyone who listened, she felt a slight tremor in her hands, a small reminder that she was human, that this moment carried immense pressure. But she welcomed it. Pressure was familiar. It had always pushed her to grow, to focus, to be better. She let it guide her fingers, adding intensity where needed, softening where emotion demanded. The music became a conversation, a dialogue between her and the room, without a single word spoken. Some guests whispered to each other now, unable to contain their amazement. They had expected an easy, entertaining moment. What they had received was a performance that challenged them, that made them listen, that made them feel. They realized that this young woman was not just talented. She was extraordinary. She could capture an audience without any grandeur, without any theatrics, simply with her hands and her heart. The powerful man tried to hide it, but she noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes. He had believed that wealth, status, and influence could shape the room. His words and presence could control the environment. But here, in front of him, music was reshaping the space, creating a power that belonged to her alone. The room had shifted without a single confrontation, without a single argument. She had remained silent, calm, and let her art speak louder than his pride. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. She was fully immersed in the music, feeling each note resonate in her fingers and in the room. She could see the subtle reactions of people, the nods, the leaning forward, the glances exchanged in wonder. The power dynamic she had felt upon entering was changing with every key she pressed. She was no longer an outsider. She was the center, the force that commanded attention, not with words, but with the undeniable truth of her skill. Even when she glanced briefly toward the powerful man, she saw a change. The arrogance that had marked his entrance had softened, replaced by a hesitant acknowledgement. He had not anticipated this, had not expected a simple performance to turn the room, to challenge his assumptions, to command attention from everyone present. He had tried to humiliate her, But she had done something stronger. She had earned respect through her talent, her dedication, and the authenticity she brought to the piano. As the final chords of the piece faded, there was a brief silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a moment that felt heavier than the air itself. No one moved immediately. She remained at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her breathing steady but aware of the tension in the room. She did not need to look around. She could feel the shift, the subtle acknowledgement that had replaced doubt with admiration. Finally, applause began to rise, slowly at first, then stronger, filling the room with sound. People clapped sincerely, some even standing, moved not just by the performance, but by the story behind it, the journey it represented, the courage it took to stand here and play, despite doubt and judgment. She bowed slightly, acknowledging the response without pride, without arrogance. She had played for herself, for her music, and the rest had followed naturally. The powerful man stood as well, but it was a different kind of standing now. There was no mockery, no subtle jab, only a forced recognition that this young woman had accomplished something remarkable. She did not seek his approval. It was unnecessary. She had shown that talent, dedication, and heart could not be measured by wealth or power. She felt a quiet confidence settling in as the applause began to fade. It was not her first time performing, but the intensity of this moment made it different. The room that had once seemed intimidating, full of powerful people and whispered judgments, now felt alive in a new way. Eyes that had doubted her were now fixed on her hands, on her movements, on the music that continued to flow through her. She took a deep breath and let her fingers hover above the keys. Sensing the potential in the air, the way anticipation seemed to ripple across the room like an invisible wave.